Since humanity first started walking the earth, we've had dominion over every living thing. But humanity has exploited creation in the name of the almighty dollar. Until today, around 1/3 of known life on Earth faces extinction. But there are those who are acting to save endangered species before it's too late. Australia, the great southern land. For eons, it has been isolated from the rest of the world. Its amazingly unique wildlife sharing the continent with the Noongars, the Bardi, the Kuris, the Pitjantjatjara and many more Aboriginal peoples. These people, their culture as unique as the animals and the land itself, have walked and sung the history and legend of this strange and diverse continent for more than 40,000 years. This vast and fragile country was theirs and theirs alone. Then around 400 years ago, a ship sailed over the horizon, bringing with it the first Europeans. Settlers brought their way of doing things, their windmills, their houses, and changed Australia forever. Not only for the indigenous people, but for the endemic species of plants and animals as well. With the settlers came rats, dogs, rabbits, cats and foxes. While Australia still has some of the world's most unique species, in the last 200 years, Australia has seen the worst level of extinctions than any other country on the face of the earth. It had at least 144 species of marsupials. Today, 10 of those have disappeared, and another 19 are on the endangered list. While Australians may think they are conservation-minded, they have the worst reputation on record. In the past 2 centuries, scores of species of mammals, birds, insects and plants have become extinct. The most famous of all being the Tasmanian tiger, or thylacine. A marsupial wolf, it was hunted to extinction. This was the last one. It died out during the 1930s, along with its species. And today there are many, many more species going exactly the same way. The woylie or brush-tailed bettong, the chuditch or quoll, the numbat, the long-nosed potteroo, and the incredibly fragile honey possum. These are but a few of the mini marsupials that are teetering on the edge of extinction. But there are people fighting to save them before it's too late. Australia is known for its vast outback, its big blue skies. it's scrub. It's huge red and grey deserts that seem to go on forever. The deserts that change from dust to the perfect floral arrangements once the rains come. But as well as its endless deserts and scrubland, it used to have seemingly endless forests. But over the past 100 years or so, those forests have been replaced by seemingly endless farmland. Paddocks and fields that stretch as far as the eye can see and beyond. This is the result of ill-conceived and what is turning out to be disastrous land clearing encouraged by ill-informed governments. Since the 1930s, millions and millions of acres have been cleared. In fact, 40% of the country's forests have gone, including 75% of rainforests and 90% of mallee and temperate woodland. The legacy, like insidious rising damp, the water table has risen to the surface, bringing with it deadly salts that render the soil useless, killing anything that tries to grow there. The result is that today more than 6.25 million acres of farmland is now totally useless, and it's feared that within the next 2 decades as much as 40% of farmland in Western and Southeastern Australia will have been ruined because of salinity.
It's about as serious as you could get. I think just judging by what's happened in, say, my professional lifetime, I would say another 2 or 3 decades and almost nothing could be left.
Professor Don Bradshaw is head of zoology at the University of Western Australia and is currently in the process of establishing a course in conservation management. He says, although ignorance is to blame, we should have known better. Things should never have got this bad. The politicians should have known better.
We go back to Charles Court, the father of our Premier, who boasted about clearing a million acres a year and actually did much better than that. And the clearing of the marginal lands, which in my opinion should never have been cleared at all.
And he says this land clearing is one of the greatest causes of extinctions and is a continuing threat to Australia's surviving endangered species. For example, he talks about the bettong, a mini kangaroo that likes to make its home underground. It once roamed over the whole of southern Australia, from the west coast for thousands of miles to the east coast. But by the late 1980s, it was extinct on the mainland. Its only refuge was on remote offshore islands. Today, because of the work carried out by Professor Bradshaw and people like him, these animals have been reintroduced back onto the mainland and are fighting their way back from the very brink of extinction. But that's not the end of the problem. Although these animals are being brought back and reintroduced, they have other enemies to deal with. Feral foxes and cats, animals that don't belong in this fragile environment. Operation Foxglove is a government-run intensive eradication program aimed at killing off feral foxes so that the native animals have a chance of surviving. And the results are encouraging. Already, large tracts of native bush have been cleared of these killers. One such area is a place in Western Australia called Perup. The Perup is a place like no other. This is what this part of Australia used to be like before European settlement. Here there are giant dragonflies with gossamer wings. And real dragons stalk the grasses. This is where Professor Bradshaw has brought a team to help study the animals that now live here.
The first thing is to make sure the blood doesn't clot, so this is heparin, which is anticoagulant.
Professor Bradshaw says it's not as simple as releasing endangered species back into an area and letting them get on with it. You have to monitor them continually if they are to survive.
Goes down as far as you can go before it gets too fat. Probably.
The aim of the course is to try and really produce the next generation of wildlife managers, people who will go out and try to implement programs to save species.
Oh yeah, these animals can move 1.5 kilometres in a night. So
we've chosen Perup because it's one of the areas which is intensively fox baited, and therefore there's a wide variety of native species living here, and they're readily accessible.
Just a little bit where we took the blood from this morning.
And because it's summer, what we wanted to focus on was the availability of water. Although we're sitting here by a lake, of course, only the animals that live in this immediate area would come and use this water. All the rest of the animals here have no access to drinking water at all. And water, of course, is one of the most limiting resources in Australia. Our idea was to try and catch 3 or 4 native species. The woylie, the little bettong, possums, we got one this morning, chuditch, the native cat. Bandicoot is the other one, which we haven't caught yet, we've only seen one.
And here on almost any night it's easy to find the shy bandicoot, sniffing and scuffling in the undergrowth, looking for shoots and insects. The bandicoot is a solitary animal, but like many animals, it has a home range, preferring scrubby areas that supply plenty of insects for them to eat. Females have about 6 young at a time and carry them in a backward-facing pouch. The pouch faces backwards so that as the bandicoot goes through the undergrowth, unwanted debris doesn't infect the pouch. What adds to the problem of saving this species and others like this bettong is there is a high death rate among young, with an average of only 2 out of 6 surviving, and those that do survive have to deal with the loss of habitat and the constant threat of foxes and cats. Unlike many animals in the northern hemisphere that breed in the spring, these amazing little creatures begin their breeding in early winter, making it easier for the little ones to survive, not having to battle the incredible Australian heat. This bandicoot's pouch is already full with tiny joeys. You can see them moving around inside her. And the bandicoot is quite happy to share its feeding ground with other rare and endangered creatures, like this woylie, another mini marsupial, or a passing possum. All of these mini marsupials are basically nocturnal, and for the first time special infrared cameras are used to see what these little creatures do when they think no one can see them. Professor Bradshaw says this kind of fearless behaviour is one of the reasons all these species easily fall prey to introduced predators. For thousands of years, the woylie, the bandicoot and so many of these mini marsupials have had no large predators to hunt them. Therefore, they know no fear. They simply fail to recognise the danger in the fox's teeth and the cat's claws. They don't have the fear and flight instinct like other creatures. While a rabbit, for example, is used to living its life on the edge and at the slightest hint of danger makes a dash for it, these species don't. They're literally sitting ducks. Which means if we're not mindful, cats and foxes will hunt them to extinction. Which, of course, is exactly what's happening. And while the woylie and the bandicoot forage through the night for their food, Don Bradshaw's team is also out and about, checking benign traps to catch and learn more about these tiny creatures of the night.
Plenty of bait. We've got 100 traps out there. We'll try and get through as many as we can tonight. We'll certainly do them all in the morning. Hopefully we'll catch, we've gone at like 12 of each species. I don't know if we'll get them all tonight, but we should get a few of each. We'll see how we go.
It was a successful night, and they have collected a number of woylies and bandicoots. Back at the research station, the wildlife scientists begin to record their data.
What we need to do with the animal first of all is to ear tag it. So we'll put a tag.
The woylies don't drink much.
To number it.
It relies mainly on the moisture from the food it eats.
We measure its leg length. We call it PES.
What they need to determine is how much water these tiny creatures absorb. They do this by injecting them with mildly radioactive water, and then see how long it takes to pass through their system.
The actual amount of water the animal takes in once we let it go. And then I'll get this on top, and then we'll put the bag over the top.
The urine is collected in these tins, and tomorrow it will be tested and the results logged, and the woylie will be returned to the bush. One of the scientists working with Don Bradshaw is Mark Gukaklis. He is specialising in what is probably the smallest kangaroo, the woylie.
Okay, we're going to release this animal back in the trap, which we got it with last night. See the tags all match with the trap tag over there. The thing about releasing these particular animals is the same sort of techniques with releasing as you would have. Woylies are a fantastic teaching exercise because they are such a difficult animal to deal with. And I think it has to do with their temperament. You only have to watch them for a little while in the evening and you see that they're always quite active. They're always sniffing out, they're always looking for stuff. They're quite hyper. And that's how they behave when you try and actually catch them.
The woylie is primarily a fungi-eating creature. It loves to eat truffles which grow underground. It has a special bacteria in its gut that breaks down the fungi and produces useful byproducts that the woylie can digest for a more balanced diet, as it doesn't eat greenery at all. In its short 7-year life, a woylie will shift up to 5,000 tonnes of material as it hunts for its favourite food. And there is an interesting connection between the woylie, the truffles and deadly poisonous plant species.
We've got some woylie digging activity here, and it's a really interesting patch of bush because we've got animals that have been digging in amongst these particular plant species, which are the poison species. This is heartleaf poison.
You see, the woylie, like some other animals, can eat poisons that would kill you or me. It also kills foxes and cats.
One of the reasons they managed to hang on in an area where they were under attack is because of some of the flora that occurs in the Parrop. They're actually pea plants that produce a toxin called sodium monofluoroacetate. And before you get scared by that, it's actually commercially produced as a poison called 1080. And 1080 is perhaps our main weapon of being able to control feral animals in the southwest of Western Australia, over much of the continent indeed. So we have this link between this toxic plant and between an animal that's actually feeding on these truffles. And the link is quite circular. These plants, our native fauna, have grown up with plants that naturally produce 1080. It means they have a very high resistance to this toxin, and it means that we can use it to poison animals that haven't evolved with this toxin, that have been introduced from overseas. They're very sensitive to it, and we can poison and control those animals without affecting our native fauna.
In fact, 1080 is so potent, if a cat or fox kills and devours a woylie that has consumed some of this plant, the cat or fox itself would die.
And so fox numbers are probably not as high as they were in other areas in the Parrot, and that's why these animals just managed to hang on. Very fortunate, very lucky.
The woylie used to range across Australia from east to west, from north to south. But in the early 1980s, it was realised they were on the verge of extinction and only survived in 3 small patches of forest in the southwest of Australia. And immediately a plan, Operation Foxglove, was put in place to save this smallest kangaroo. Once the fox eradication plan took effect, the woylies started breeding like woylies.
They're always pregnant, so they can produce many young over a very short period of time. Over a year they might have 4 young. They have what's called diapause. They can have a fertilised egg within them, and they can hold that egg in stasis while they've got a pouch young. As soon as the pouch young is fully developed and leaves the pouch, the already fertilised egg starts developing very quickly, so they've got the ability to increase in numbers over, very substantially over a very short period of time. And that's what happened.
And now Mark and Professor Bradshaw and their team spend their days and nights trapping, processing and releasing these remarkable little animals. They are very encouraged by the amount of native species that are returning to the area, but they must remain vigilant and ensure that the ferals don't return.
We're actually going to lay traps there.
Now it's a waiting and watching game. Watching for feral animals and making sure they don't get a foothold again, and waiting for the mini marsupial numbers to increase to sufficient numbers that they can be taken off the endangered list. But while the future of the woylie and the bandicoot looks good, other species are still critically endangered. Half a continent away on the other side of Australia is another organisation doing its thing to save endangered species. While Professor Don Bradshaw, the University of Western Australia and other government organisations are working to save endangered species in the west of Australia, in South Australia, a private organisation known as Earth Sanctuaries is fighting the same battles: land degradation, indiscriminate clearing of the bushland and feral animals.
This land used to be a living thing. It was full of numbats and bettongs and bilbies and bandicoots, but it's been cleared, it's been overgrazed, and there's none of the perennial grasses, none of the salt bushes left, and it's really pretty heartbreaking.
Greg Martin is project manager for Earth Sanctuaries Limited, a public company with the specific aim of encouraging people to invest in the future by investing in his company, to literally put their money where their hearts are. And Earth Sanctuary's aim is to wage its own private war against extinctions in Australia.
Well, I started at Scotia Sanctuary about 2 years ago as project manager, and that involved building the feral-free fence and setting up the breeding programs. And we had a staff here of 11 young people, and they were the ones that had built all that you've seen.
The philosophy behind Earth Sanctuaries is simple: save Australian native animals at all costs before it's too late. And while Greg takes care of the day-to-day running of the sanctuaries, this is the man who started it all. Dr. John Walmsley. This former professor of mathematics and computer sciences says since he was a boy he has watched Australia's wildlife disappear. He gave up his academic career many years ago to go back to nature, to try and turn the tide of extinctions. Today he is probably Australia's greatest wildlife warrior.
Yeah, the story of Australian wildlife is quite incredible because, 500 years ago Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and I guess the age of exploitation began. And since then, in that 500 years, the world has lost 60 species of mammal. Now 20 of those are Australian in the last 200 years. And this means that Australians have, as a race, white Australians, as a race, have the worst record in the world for wildlife management since life began on Earth. We're the absolute vandals of conservation, if you like. And it's interesting, but because we've sort of didn't see, because our animals are nocturnal or something, because nobody noticed them disappearing, we didn't seem to realise it. We've actually put across the story that we're good at conservation and we're not. In fact, Australia is the worst in the world.
Damning words, but John has a plan to change that. His mission is to convince Australian people to get behind his company.
We buy land, we fence it with feral-proof fencing, we eradicate the feral, we put back the wildlife that used to be there.
To rehabilitate this land and country like it, it's not just a matter of planting a few trees and bushes. We have to bring the small native animals back as well. They evolved together with the plants and bushes, and we need that relationship between the two for the land to be healthy again.
Yucumara is one of Earth Sanctuary's success stories. In the heart of the state of South Australia, this is some of the last remaining remnants of old mallee woodland. Mallee trees are slow growing and live for hundreds of years. Ask some country people about mallee trees and they'll say mallee roots are great for burning. And that's unfortunate, because mallee trees and roots also make great homes for these creatures. At Yucumara, John Walmsley and his people have been able to reintroduce an entire suite of animals which were previously extinct in the area. Animals like the shy numbat. The numbat, one of the most endearing of the mini marsupials, used to be in abundance about 100 years ago. But by the 1970s, there was less than 1,000 remaining. Again, the eradication of foxes and cats has helped numbers increase. It searches for food by sniffing. It lives mainly on termites, which it sniffs out, then turns over the soil or leaf mould to find them. Numbats are essentially solitary, with same-sex animals occupying home ranges. The numbat generally makes its home in a burrow or hollow log, and it loves the mallee. But mallee trees are extremely rare these days.
This young growth mallee looks okay, but it's not really great habitat for animals to live in. After it's been chained, which was about 30 years ago, it's only left 2 or 3 species of plants, and that's pretty unhealthy. If you have a look at some of the old growth mallee around, it's got those beautiful hollows in, and in those hollows things like the numbats can live and shelter, a lot of birds, insects of course, lizards which eat the insects. It's a whole living habitat there. there's still plenty of it across Australia, and the problem with it is that it seems to burn every 5 or 10 years or so, and that just makes it sterile underneath.
About 1/5 of Australia was once covered by mallee woodland. Today, most of that has gone, and it will be at least another few hundred years or so before these young trees will be suitable habitat. Earth Sanctuaries has had enormous success in breeding and reintroducing rare and endangered species. Animals like the bridled nail-tailed wallaby. This attractive striped wallaby is rarer even than the great giant panda of China.
The bridled nail-tailed wallaby was once the most common small kangaroo west of Sydney. It extended right down below the Murray River and right up into subtropical Queensland. Now, they thought it was extinct until about 1974, and then they found a small colony in Queensland. When we got ours about 2 years ago, the numbers were around about 700 animals. Now I understand they're up to nearly 1,000 now.
The problem is, like their smaller cousins, the woylie and the bandicoot, they don't have the fright and flight instinct needed to escape foxes and cats. When these animals feel threatened, they freeze or hide under a bush, and the wallaby ends up dead. It's the same for the long-nosed potteroo. Potteroos are thought to be the most ancient of all marsupials. There is fossil evidence that this species has changed little in tens of thousands of years. These animals mature at about 1 year old and tend to pair up and breed all year round. They appear to pair up for a period of time, though it's not known if it's for life. But once they find a mate, it's not a case of going from one female to another. The male seems to hang about and show affection. Despite their size, the males can be quite aggressive, seeing off any would-be challenger who threatens his territory. And he can be very persistent. Or is she just giving him the runaround? But of course they eventually mate and produce offspring. The pouch life for the young is about 4 months, then they leave their mothers for good. Like the other mini marsupials, potteroos forage around for food from dusk till dawn, searching for fungi, insects, roots and tubers. They share their idyllic home with the charming and vocal rufous hair bettong. This species of bettong communicates to others around it by vocalizing with hisses and spits and by thumping its hind legs. Both the male and female have home ranges. This range could take them up to 4 miles as they search for food. The male generally shares himself with a couple of females. His vocalization and hind leg thumping is seen more often when he defends his territory against an invasion from another male. The females begin breeding when they're about 11 months old. Their gestation period is a short 22 days when the young is born and makes its way to the pouch, where it stays for up to 16 weeks. It's hard to believe that the whole of Australia was once covered by a rich variety of animals such as these, but sadly, those days are gone. It's said 95% of arid zone animals have disappeared, and never, never will Australia's outback be the same. Never will it have the richness it once had. Only in sanctuaries like Earth sanctuaries will this type of diversity be seen, because Australia will never make a full recovery. That is why people like John Walmsley and Greg Marshall and the others continue to dedicate their lives to saving what is left of Australia's unique fauna. One species that has become a flagship species is this strange-looking creature. It may look like a cross between an alien and a rabbit, but it's not. It's a bilby. And this one lives at Dryandra, another sanctuary in Western Australia. But this one is run by the state government's conservation department.
Well, I think the bilby is a classic case where you have a species that was once widespread right across Australia and now has been reduced to very small pockets to about 20% of its former range.
Dr. Chris Warren is a wildlife vet. She has worked in the field with endangered species since 1993. Her previous patients were orangutans in Borneo, a lot different from these tiny marsupials. Professor Ralph Swan is her boss at Murdoch University in Western Australia.
There were two species of bilby, the greater and the lesser. It seems as though if bilbies are released into a suitable soil-type environment, their instinct to create burrows, as far as I'm aware, is not a problem.
He and Dr. Warren are committed to teaching veterinary students the importance of pro bono work on endangered species.
I think it's very important. I think there's ever-increasing opportunities for veterinarians to be involved with wildlife conservation, and I think it's an area that many veterinarians are interested in.
And it's this interest that has brought Chris Warren and Professor Ralph Swan to set up this bush operating theatre. As well as the bilby, there are other endangered species living behind the protection of an electric fence.
Oops. Damn it.
This is also the home for the beautiful numbat we met earlier.
Those babies.
The numbats have been at Dryandra since the early 1990s. These wildlife officers have trapped this mother to check on her young.
So she's got 4 now.
The little ones in the mother's pouch should grow up safe from feral cats and foxes because Dryandra is now clear of ferals. It's a safe haven for Australia's many marsupials. And although this battle has been won, the war is far from over, and the casualties are enormous. When you consider an average feral cat weighs 4 kilos, it needs around 300 grams of flesh a day to survive. That's the equivalent of one numbat every 24 hours. And with 10 million feral cats on the loose in Australia, that's 10 million numbat-sized animals are killed each day. If that doesn't shock you, feral cats will eat the equivalent of some 36 billion native animals every year. Australia's native animals just can't stand that kind of annihilation. Back at the field hospital, Dr. Warren and Professor Swan has a patient on the operating table. They're implanting a computer chip to make it easier for the wildlife officers to keep track of them. These animals were extinct in this area until Easter 2000, when they were reintroduced. Now, for the first time in decades, they are roaming free back where they belong. Before being released here at Dryandra, these animals were bred at another wildlife sanctuary, Kenyana, run by June Butcher.
The bilby itself is such a wonderful animal. It's so easy to handle.
And also very curious, as our infrared camera shows. June and the team at Kenyana have been breeding the bilbies for some years now, and it was their offspring that was released at Dryandra. This enclosure is where so many young bilbies have been conceived. And again our infrared camera catches a male bilby trying to mate with an unreceptive but not disinterested female. And although this young male isn't successful, according to June, it's a different story out in the wild.
And it's only in the last couple of weeks that we've heard that our releasing is working, because they've actually recaptured a mother with 2 babies. So they're actually breeding in the wild now, which is a first for WA, and we feel very excited to be involved in that project.
The bilby is becoming an Australian icon. Major corporations like BHP have got behind the plan to save this species by sponsoring the Bilby Health Project, being coordinated by Chris Warren and Ralph Swan. Similarly, at Easter time, supermarkets are replacing Easter bunnies with Easter bilbies and donating part of their take to saving this little creature. This is Shark Bay. It's World Heritage listed. And it's no wonder. It's home to a diverse and unique ecosystem. Along with its terrestrial life, the waters that make up the bay are teeming. Migrating whales pass by here every year on their way from calving in the warm waters of the far north to the icy feeding grounds of the Antarctic. Wandering whale sharks frequent the coastline outside the bay. Shark Bay plays host to a myriad of fish species, not to mention dolphins and of course sharks, the namesake of the bay. But sharks are a long way from the minds of these people. They have something much smaller on their minds.
So we've got to take one of those.
Jeff Short and his team are working with an animal that many people may consider vermin. But out here in the wilds of Shark Bay, it's not. It's just another example of Australia's rich biodiversity.
Well, most Australians don't realise that their fauna is made up of not only just the marsupials, species like kangaroos and koalas and so on, but also eutherian mammals or placental mammals like you and I. Now, these animals are very large and they just fit in there.
Jeff Short is a principal research scientist for the CSIRO, the Australian Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation. He's working on re-establishing and maintaining several colonies of stick-nest rats, a rare and endangered rodent which lives on an island off this remote part of Australia, known as Useless Loop on Harrison Prong. The plan is to trap wild stick-nest rats on the island and reintroduce them into a safe area back on the mainland.
So the only really saving grace is that some of these species have persisted on offshore islands, or in tiny remnant populations. And this has given us the opportunity to now try and reconstruct some of those populations.
The Stick Nest Rat campaign is part of the Useless Loot Biosphere project, a scheme aimed at reintroducing animals back into an area where they were formerly extinct. A colony on Salutation Island was established a number of years ago, and because of its isolation was safe from the threat of feral predators. Apart from the odd endemic bird of prey, the island has become a safe haven for these waddling rodents. Once released, these animals will become prisoners behind barbed wire and electric fences to protect them from the feral killers. The project has been going for more than 10 years and is proving to be very successful. Along with the Department of Conservation, the CSIRO in association with the Shark Bay salt mining community, they are paving the way in conservation. But it's a constant battle that won't be won easily or quickly. While some people may not like the idea of a rat being saved from extinction, another animal, no bigger than a mouse, you may find more endearing. This is the honey possum, one of the smallest marsupials. It lives in just one area of Australia, the coastal sand plain heaths of southwestern Australia. The honey possum is unique even among marsupials. It has a unique diet. It lives on the nectar produced by proteas and bottlebrushes. It is one of creation's very few true nectarivorous mammals. In the wild, they live almost exclusively on the sweet nectar produced by these plants. It has fewer teeth than any other marsupial, preferring to use its long pointed snout and its long pointed brush-tipped tongue to probe the flowers. It's thought to be the last survivor of a long-extinct marsupial group which owes its survival to its highly specialised way of life. Another strange thing about this tiny possum is that, unlike most mammals, it doesn't have claws to help it climb. It has nails, just like primates. It climbs using its fingernails to hang on to the tree, like monkeys do. It also has a prehensile tail to hang on to branches, again, like many monkeys do. The size of a mouse, these honey possums are gregarious, hanging out in small groups. This little marsupial gives birth to the smallest of all mammal young, weighing less than 5 milligrams. Yet the male, for its size, has proportionately the biggest testicles of all mammals, weighing around 5% of its total body weight. Scientists think this has much to do with their extremely promiscuous lifestyle. These creatures are being bred at the University of Western Australia, again under the guidance of Professor Don Bradshaw. But he says unless Australian people come together as a nation and take wildlife conservation seriously, then he and others are wasting their time, because these honey possums and so many of the other mini marsupials will cease to exist.
I just hope that people will realise that conservation is one of the major challenges for Australians for the future.
Most people have never seen bettongs or bilbies or woylies or numbats. And if you don't know that they exist out there, then how can you save them? And now is the only window of opportunity we've got. In a few years' time it will be too late. We have to act now. We have to save these species now, before it's too late.
Of being part of a society that, you know, is responsible for 1/3 of the world's mammal extinctions in recent times. I still think now that if we can turn that around, we'll go from being the losers to being the winners, because we'll be leaders in terms of being able to turn a serious environmental situation around, and that's going to be critical.
If Australia is to save its endangered species, to put an end to its diabolical record of the worst extinctions in the world, then Australians will have to realise and acknowledge that its farming practices of clearing woodlands and forests is no different to the slash and burn agriculture of third world countries like Brazil and Madagascar, and just as devastating. If Australia is to save its endangered species and its own farmland, then alternative farming practices must be found, planting crop trees, for example, or turning to wildlife and ecotourism. Likewise, the federal and state governments must bite the bullet and declare an official war against feral animals. They must adopt drastic measures to wipe out the scourge of feral animals. Otherwise, Australia outside of vermin-proof fences will be devoid of these mini marsupials. And the only place you'll see them is in these fenced-off sanctuaries. And both the Australian people and big business must get behind John Walmsley, Professor Don Bradshaw, Professor Ralph Swan and others to help them guide Australia and its wildlife to a new future. Or else Australia will be condemned by future generations, because the Australian people know what they're doing, and future generations will look back on Australians of today with an accusing finger saying, "You should have known better. You should have acted before it's too late."